Our next guest is one of the premier names in the firearms industry when it comes to suppressors. I was first introduced to him a couple of years ago. One of our good friends, Paul Phillips, introduced me, has used Greg's products for a number of years. Greg Latka. Greg, thanks for being on the show. Well, let's talk a little bit about your history, who you are, where you grew up, how you got into the firearms industry.
And at 13 years old, I ended up in the machine shop, and from that point on, I never got out of it. I basically ran 42 years of machining aerospace products. We've got things that M1 tanks, helicopters, all the jets. We've got things on the moon. We did all those products. And right around 1985, I wanted to do some design work on suppressors. So I got my FFL and SOT and started making suppressors and designing them at that point, and got my first patent in 1991. From that point on, we incorporated under GSL Technology in 93, and we started building and designing suppressors. And then Gemtech contacted me. We built some product for them. And in somewhere around 94, I joined Gemtech. And then after a couple of years, I was president of Gemtech for roughly 20 years. And then last year, we went different directions. So now we're on our own here. We're doing our own product line. Gemtech's doing their own product line. So that's basically my background on this.
Okay, so for the customers listening that want to contact you about a suppressor, they're going to contact GSL. Can you tell them how to get a hold of you?
Yes, sir.
You have a website, contact info?
It's gsltechnology.com.
And Greg, you're being a bit modest, because I know that a lot of the technology that we see in suppressors in general today, didn't you have a hand in kind of coming up with that whole technology?
Well, basically, when I got into it, everybody was using large diameter tubes and long tubes and things of that nature. I came in, and we just about brought them in half as far as size and weight and things of that nature. All the quick disconnect stuff that we brought out came out of my factory because, the aerospace industry, we were into the quick disconnect couplers. And so that's where the design and development came out of that. So basically, I think that a lot of the baffle designs started off, over in our place. I did some work with Joe Gaddini, and he's part of the baffle system that we use currently, plus the other stuff that we developed over here. So it was a joint venture.
I got to say, I'm completely baffled by how suppressors work in general, but Kelly's looking at me across the desk here.
You have got to be able to appreciate Zev's really bad sense of humor.
Oh, yeah, I know. But the problem is with suppressors, there's no school that you can go to learn this stuff. It's all self-taught, self-learned. I just seem to have the ability to sort of take a vision as to what the gases are doing and how the flow is going, and when I get all done with experimenting, the gas patterns pretty much match to what I've seen in my mind, so that's a lot of times how I do things here. Now, from experience, I've been doing this for over 30 years.
So, I want to talk about that a little bit. I want to go back. You said you've been in the machining business since you were 13 years old, and
yes, sir.
Aerospace and everything. You have skills today that most of the younger machinists don't have, and that is, there was a time when there was not any CNC machines. Everything that you was manually equipped. There are guys who come into this, want to work for me or my brother, who can program CNC machines and run them all day long, but you ask them to make a part on a lathe or a manual mill, and they don't know which way to turn the handle. So
you're correct, yes.
It's a skill that's almost gone by the wayside, but is invaluable in the firearms industry.
It really is, and one of the things I insisted, my son runs the back end of the shop for me, and when he came to work for me, I insisted that he learn some of the old methods, A lot of the guys want to come in and just hit the CNC button, away we go with the computers. But unless you understand tooling and design and clearance and things of that nature, it all comes together. It's just one is done with a CNC machine, the other one's done manually. And I grew up in that field.
And I think that's probably the reason why you're able so quickly to take something from conception to production. I mean, I was amazed at how quickly you were able to come up with a can for the new 375 lethal mag round. I know Paul Phillips did a wonderful video, actually a set of videos, proofing not only how well it works and how silent it is, but also in the ability to show how it did not affect the zero at all. I think he recently did a 500-yard test on a 3-shot group with one of your cans on it and one without, and there was no difference. I think it was 1.75.
Right. He had no POI shift. Mm-hmm.
Isn't that amazing? So, and I really don't think that people who are just working on a CNC machine can take it from conception to production that quickly. So, good job.
No, it takes a lot of years of experience. But Paul threw me a ringer on that one. He just showed up and told me this is what he wanted, and I had no specifications on it as far as the bullet and everything and pressure curves. So we were just sort of going through my mind what we wanted to do. And when he came over and we tested it, when he first shot it, I thought, oh boy, here we go. It's pretty intense. But we put it on, and I was really surprised how well it works.
You know, one of the standard rules that applied until just recently is that suppressors could shoot accurately, but they rather rarely shot to the same point of impact as the gun did without the suppressor on it. So what I'm saying is, for our listeners, you shoot a group and say it's in the middle of the X, and then you put the suppressor on. It might be 1.5 inches to the right and maybe a 1/2 inch high. It'll shoot all the same, the bullets in the same hole, basically, but it won't be in the same place. And I know the one video that Paul did at, was he shooting it at 500 yards, I think?
Yes, 500.
No point of impact change, and that's so phenomenal. Was that luck, or is that something that you're finding is pretty consistent with your suppressors?
Well, years ago, we were all worried about dB reduction and things of that nature, so we didn't have a lot of accurate shooters back then 20 years ago, so we were just more concerned about sound. But as we got down the road and we have people that can shoot a lot better equipment to shoot with everything else, it became important that accuracy was part of it. So it took a lot of years to develop what was causing the problems with accuracy and what was throwing the bullets and everything. So you have to get a compromise as far as what it's going to take to make it accurate, but also once the bullet leaves, we contain that gas in there and do what we do. But no, the one that Paul's got is phenomenal. It's doing a real good job.
I was talking to Paul, and he's a very humble guy, but he's not only a great shooter, he's also a great wind coach. And I said to him, how did you get a group like that? And he goes, Zev, I'm just the monkey behind the trigger. It's the guys who call the wind that's more important. But he is an innovator and brought that project to you quickly, and you came out with it quickly, and everybody is really, really happy with the results. And I've always wondered, does a suppressor actually give you more, feet per second because you've got a little more space behind that bullet for those gases to work, or do the baffles take that effect away?
Well, the thing that you have to do is first thing, the gases are going faster than the bullet, so you need to get the bullet through the gas and get it out of there. But you don't want the gases to affect the bullet at that point in time. So you want the bullet to relieve, and then you have to use the gas itself with the pressure and close off the hole. So there's a lot of manipulating that we do to make sure that we can block off that hole. It's like a muffler on a car, except they don't have a through hole, and that's the problem we run into. And if you're too aggressive, then basically you'll tipple the bullet.
Can you tell me whether or not that suppressor that Paul used also had a muzzle brake?
Yes, sir. Inside it does, yes. Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the things that we found out when working with our 50 cals, you take a muzzle brake off a 50 cal to put a can on it, and it will flat whack you. People, for some reason, have the misconception that a suppressor works like a muzzle brake, and it's two totally different concepts. And I suppose a suppressor might reduce the felt recoil a little bit, simply because it's with that gas expanding and hitting the front of the suppressor, it might reduce it a little bit, but it's not like a muzzle brake.
Well, actually, it should be if it's done properly, because what happens is the gases come out of the barrel, and hit the first blast baffle, and it pushes it forward. It's like going on the highway. You put your hand out the window, and the wind pushes your hand back. It's basically the same thing. It's pulling the gun forward. So if it's done correctly, it should work.
Well, I know several people, including my son. The only 2 times he's ever been scope bit in his life was when they took a 50 cal, took the suppressor, put on a suppressor, and took the muzzle brake off, and it got him. So as compared to the clamshell type muzzle brake that we use on our 50 cal,
right,
the suppressors that he's used has not been nearly as effective as a muzzle brake.
Well, maybe we should take a look at that.
That's a great thing. Just a funny thing is, you probably heard about it. It seems like everybody in the world has heard. There's been a new record set for the longest confirmed kill in combat. A Canadian sniper. They use a suppressor on their guns. As a matter of fact, they have a policy that they do not shoot their guns without the suppressor on it, both for the safety of the shooter and the lack of
it does a few things. It gets rid of the signature of the flash. It gets rid of the signature of the noise, especially at night. If you have a flash out there, I don't care if it's white or not, they can see where it came from.
Well, I think most of the people that shoot a 50 cal, they're not nearly as worried about the recoil as they are the muzzle blast. I mean, with the recoil, with the muzzle brake on there, man, it doesn't take many rounds for you to really pay the price. And with the suppressor on there, you eliminate all that. It just makes it much more pleasant.
It eliminates a lot of fatigue that you end up with.
And everybody else does. I know the Israelis, they're only allowed to shoot 10 rounds a day. 50
really?
cal. They have a military-wide policy. When you're training on a 50 cal, 10 rounds a day max. That's it. Now the Canadians, they don't have that problem. They shoot 50 to 100 rounds a day.
Sure.
Which makes them as good as they are, and why they continue to make and break the records and be able to perform.
Hey, Greg, you might be one of the guys that can tell us what's going on with the new laws and the proposition to make suppressors no longer an NFA item. Do you have any insight you could share?
Well, everybody thought that when Trump got in, it was going to happen right away. That's the first thing he's going to do before he even had lunch, is sign that bill, and that's not what's going to happen. I think that if we go a year and a half to 2 years, you might see something come through, unless they tack it into another bill with other things on there and they sneak it through. Basically, I think if they are not real careful, we could end up with Pandora's box, where you have anybody and everybody with suppressors out there, and if somebody goes into a facility using a suppressor and a lot of people get hurt, you're going to hear a lot of people come back and say, "Hey, see, we told you so." So I think they got to be real careful what they do and how they approach it. The biggest problem with the suppressors, as far as I'm concerned, is the delivery time. Nobody wants to wait 9 months to get a suppressor, and I don't know if you have anything else in the business that you have to wait 9 months for other than building a house.
Yeah, that is a problem, and I know because I'm in the process of getting my tax stamp for the suppressor I purchased from you. So anyway, one of the things that I wanted to bring up, and as you know, we used to call them silencers, but it doesn't make it silent. And as a matter of fact, if you had a guy walk into a gym or a club and started shooting with a suppressor on, everybody would still know what was going on. I mean, they would be able to tell. Now, it doesn't sound like what they're used to hearing as a gun, but it's not going to be so that nobody happens. There's a funny law out there. It's a federal law that says anything that creates over 129 decibels, I think it is, has to be suppressed in some way. Well, all firearms, do that.
It does, yeah.
But so they have a dilemma. Do we enforce a law that already exists? And I always wondered why they thought suppressors made you more dangerous, but it's just because I think that's what the bad guys in the movies use.
And Kelly,
that's the problem. It was Hollywood that created that monster.
Yeah, and I take issue with the people that say this is going to happen because I think it'll happen, and that's what John Lott, the author that you and I went to go see about 4 or 5 months back, who came to the the University of Arizona Law School to speak. He's a professor who talks about why gun laws should be better and why they should be easier and why there shouldn't be so many. And one of his biggest things that he talks about is the fear of something happening. So people said, oh, if everybody carries a concealed weapons permit, bad things are going to happen because we think so. And yet it hasn't happened. And it's the same thing with the suppressor. People are worried that, it's going to fall in the wrong hands and something bad is going to happen. Well, we can't just suppose that's going to happen, and that's why we should, abrogate any kind of relief from that law. It's the same thing with modern sporting rifles. I mean, when the ban was taken away, what happened? How many shootings are using an AR-15 or an AK? Not many. So, I totally take issue with people who think that we shouldn't make suppressors legal because somebody is going to use it in a bad way.
Right, yeah. Basically, it's like a car. You don't run around with your car with a muffler on it. And why would you want to go deaf when you go to the range?
Exactly.
The Black Hawk Down, they had the one fellow with a 249, and he was sitting right there with the fellow next to the muzzle, and he touched it off. I thought, oh, God, he just lost his hearing on that one. And if he had suppressor, that would have never happened. It only takes 1 or 2 rounds to lose your hearing completely if you do it done wrong.
Boy, I made a big mistake. I was in South Africa, and I shot across the back of a pickup truck with a muzzle brake on. It hit the back window of the truck and went right in my ear, and that ear rang for 4 months.
Oh, yeah. It only takes, and once your hearing's gone, it won't come back. There's nothing they can do for it.
I know that I think it's 43 states now that allow hunting with suppressors, and I think
last count that I had, there was 42 states that allowed suppressors, and 38 of those allowed hunting. Now, if they've added some to that since then, I haven't been able to see the figures, but that's the last number I had.
Yeah, I know. We here in Arizona are now allowed to hunt with suppressors, and we've been kind of a recent addition to that. One of the things is that I thought it would give the animals a disadvantage. It would give the hunters an unfair advantage being able to shoot at these animals that without them hearing it. But they can hear the trigger fall. It's not the gun that the bullet.
Definitely.
There's a lot to it. And I know I shot my elk at 780 yards. He knew I was there. It was obvious to us because he was looking right at us, but he wasn't worried about it. So the fact that we're able to reach out and shoot farther ranges now than we've ever been able to before gives us a little bit of advantage. It just kind of changes the game. I'd like to see. Do you make suppressors specifically for hunting, with lighter weight and smaller dimensions in mind?
Yes, we do. Basically, when you go into hunting, you got a longer rifle. You're not worried about somebody doing a 7-inch barrel on an AR-15 style. Most people out there have longer barrels, so the pressure curve's way down at that point in time. So we do have some things. We have one that's an aluminum one that rated for a 308 on like a 22, 24-inch barrel. But it's not something you're going to go out to the range and shoot 200 rounds through. You're going to shoot 4 or 5 rounds, and that's what you're going to do when you're hunting. So it gives you a little bit better package. But I think most people want something that's more universal. So we feed both sides of the street. Depends on what you're looking for.
Well, good. What do you think about the suppressors that slide over the barrel, and about 50% of them are behind the muzzle, and 50% of them are in front of the muzzle? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, unless it's done correctly, the back end of the suppressor is just a waste of time. It doesn't absorb a lot of the pressures. You get some that go back there, but most of them being forced forward. We've done the testing on that and proved that. So you get something like a Valmain where they're behind the muzzle. That's not real effective.
Well, I know the Canadians on their 50 cals use a suppressor that's about 17 inch diameter, and if it's not 50%, it's close to that. Sits back over the barrel, and one of the reasons that we know this is because in supplying barrels with them, we had to come up with the dimension exactly at a certain spot on the barrel where we could turn a flat on it, so that when these suppressors are on there, they had used an O-ring seal that would set on that flat, because with a tapered barrel, it just wasn't consistent enough for them to be able to have it mount that way. Well,
it sounds to me like they're using a combination of muzzle brake internally, and that'll help make the gases go into the back chamber. But you have to forcibly direct it that way.
You know, Greg, when you guys were talking about hunting and Kelly mentioned the trigger falling, they could hear that. I had the opportunity last year to be the king of 2 Mile and doing some drone work, and one of the tasks I had was to be about a mile away from where the shooters were so that I can be within enough range to take pictures of the 2 Mile target. And it was the first time I've ever been downrange under rifle fire. Well, of course I was protected, but it was the first time that I actually heard it. And what was really cool was that first thing I heard was the crack of the bullet overhead. So
Correct.
The animal is going to hear that, or the herd is going to hear that before they even hear the muzzle blast, because what I heard was a crack, then I heard the ding of the target, and only then did I hear the muzzle blast. So that was pretty interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, typically what we found is when you shoot at an animal, they hear the crack as it goes by, and they think the bullet came from behind them. A lot of times they'll run towards the shooter.
I've actually, a couple of times, and I will admit I've missed a few shots. There was a time when I went hunting when I thought, how could anybody miss? Because, I mean, you don't pull the trigger unless you're absolutely certain you're going to hit the target. But I missed a couple of shots, and at 850 yards on an elk, and he kind of turned his head and looked at the dirt behind him. It went right under his chin and hit the dirt on the side of the hill behind him. He kind of looked at it, had no idea what it was, and just went back to eating. So it didn't scare him. It was probably insignificant enough to him that he didn't run off. So, yeah, interesting what does and doesn't affect the animals.
It really. You know, the interesting thing that I'm finding is that all these states have allowed hunting with suppressors, but very, very few people know that you can. Here in Michigan, they're surprised that you can. So I don't know if the word's getting out very good or what's going on, but it's sort of something that is in the background that nobody's really aware of.
You know, here's one of the problems I know that you face. There's just no standards in terms of the way guns are built and the diameter of the muzzle and how to determine what thread needs to be on it and how much shank it is. And I mean, it would be hard for you to, sell muzzle brakes retail on a shelf and have some guy come in and say, yeah, you might have a card with it that says, tell your gunsmith, it's, whatever the pitch of the thread is, and it's this long, and that's what it has to be in order to install this. But that's a pretty significant undertaking.
Oh, it is. And if you're not concentric with the barrel, it causes a lot of grief. Now, if you get an AR style and you have a muzzle brake or a flash hider on there, it's really not an issue because it's so short you're missing it anyway. But when you put a suppressor on there, you're hanging out there, 7-8 inches. It makes a lot of difference if concentricity is off. And we've had customers that complain that the gun shot fine before we put the suppressor on, but once you put the suppressor on, it doesn't work worth a crap. Well, we tell them to send the whole thing, and we take a look at it and find out the barrel's not concentric with the bore.
Hey, Greg, I hate to tell you this, but we're out of time. It really flies when we're having a good time. I really enjoyed you being on the show. Thanks for being here with us. And, we'll have you back when we got more time sometime in the future.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.